It was a quiet night when the tension between Ozo and Adaora reached its peak. The children were already asleep, unaware of the growing storm brewing in their parents' room. Ozo's eyes burned with frustrations as he stood near the window, gazing into the dark night. His wife, Adaora, sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling with exhaustion and sadness. For the 5th time, she had given birth to a daughter, and still it wasn't enough for her husband. "I told you," Ozo began in a low but sharp voice, "I need a son to carry my family's name. I cannot stop until that happens." Adaora felt her heart sink. She had done all she could. After 5 beautiful daughters, Ozo still wasn't satisfied. The pressure, the constant complaints, and now the threat of divorce, everything was crushing her spirit. "I cannot do this anymore, Ozo," she whispered, her voice breaking. "These girls are blessings, and yet you treat me like I have failed." Ozo didn't turn around. His mind was fixed on one thing: a son. Ozo had always believed that as the first son of his family, it was his duty to have a male child who would carry on his lineage. His father, before passing away, had repeatedly reminded him of the importance of continuing the family name. So when Adaora gave birth to their first daughter, Ozo smiled but quietly hoped for a boy next time. The second child came, a girl, then the 3rd, 4th, and finally the 5th. Each time, Ozo's smile faded a little more. How Adaora adored her daughters and took pride in raising them, Ozo's disappointment grew with every birth. After the birth of their 5th daughter, Ozo's patience ran thin. He began to voice his frustrations openly, no longer hiding his dissatisfaction. "What will become of this family without a son?" he would say, passing around their small living room. "Who will continue our name? Who will inherit my responsibilities?" Adaora, exhausted from childbirth and the weight of expectations, tried to reason with him. "Our daughters are strong. They can achieve great things if we support them." But Ozo wouldn't listen. He was fixated on tradition. One evening, after a long day of tending to the children, Adaora found herself cornered again by her husband's demand. "I want you to have another child," Ozo said coldly. "And this time, it has to be a boy." Adaora had heard enough. She couldn't continue living under this pressure, bearing the emotional burden of not being able to meet her husband's expectations. "I will not," she said firmly, standing up to face him. "I cannot keep doing this." Ozo's eyes flashed with anger. "Then maybe you should leave," he said without hesitation. "If you can't give me a son, what's the point?" Adaora, with tears in her eyes, packed a small bag and left the house that night. She took refuge at her mother-in-law's home, unsure of what her next step would be. Adaora arrived at her mother-in-law's house, her heart heavy with pain. Mama Ozo, as everyone fondly called her, had always been kind to Adaora. She welcomed her daughter-in-law with open arms, sensing that something was terribly wrong. "What is it, my dear?" Mama Ozo asked gently as she led Adaora inside. Adaora couldn't hold back the tears any longer. She explained everything. Ozo's obsession with having a son, his threats, and how she could no longer bear the weight of his expectations. Mama Ozo listened quietly, nodding occasionally. When Adaora finished, the older woman sighed deeply. "My son has always been stubborn," she began, "but I did not raise him to be ungrateful." Adaora looked up, surprised. "Ungrateful?" "Yes, ungrateful," Mama Ozo said firmly. "You have given him 5 wonderful daughters, and yet he does not see the blessing in that. He only thinks of himself." Adaora felt a glimmer of hope in her mother-in-law's words. She had feared that Mama Ozo would side with her son, but instead, she was being supported. "You will stay here for as long as you need," Mama Ozo continued. "In the meantime, I will speak to Ozo. He needs to understand the value of family, not just tradition." The next day, Mama Ozo visited her son's home. Ozo was surprised to see his mother standing at the doorstep, a stern expression on her face. "Where is Adaora?" she demanded. "She left," Ozo replied flatly. "She couldn't handle the truth." Mama Ozo shook her head in disappointment. "No, Ozo, it is you who cannot handle the truth. You have been blessed with a family, yet you are throwing it away because of your pride." Ozo frowned. "It's not pride, Mama. I need a son to carry on our family name." "And at what cost?" Mama Ozo asked sharply. "You will lose your wife and your daughter just for the hope of a son. Do you even understand what it means to raise a family?" Ozo didn't answer. "Here is what we will do," Mama Ozo continued. "Adaora will stay with me for now, and you, my son, will take care of your daughters alone. Maybe then you will understand the sacrifices your wife makes every day." Ozo wanted to protest, but his mother's gaze silenced him. He reluctantly agreed, thinking it would be an easy task. On the first day without Adaora was more challenging than Ozo had expected. He had never realized how much work it took to manage 5 young girls. The moment they wake up, it was chaos. Breakfast was a disaster, with spilled milk and sticky fingers everywhere. The girls, sensing their father's inexperience, took advantage of the situation, running around the house, playing loudly and making messes. By midday, Ozo was exhausted. He didn't even thought about lunch, and his youngest daughter was already crying from hunger. In desperation, he called his mother for advice, but Mama Ozo simply said, "Figure it out, Ozo. This is what Adaora does every day." Ozo struggled through the weekend, barely managing to keep things under control. By the time Sunday evening came, he was ready to admit defeat. The house was in disarray. The girls were cranky and Ozo felt completely drained. He realized then how much he had taken Adaora's effort for granted. She had been managing all of this on her own, while he had only focused on his desire for a son. When Adaora returned home with Mama Ozo, Ozo greeted her at the door with a heavy heart. He has spent the last 2 days reflecting on his action, and he finally understood the depth of his mistake. "Adaora," he began, his voice soft with regret. "I am sorry. I didn't see how much you were doing for this family. I didn't appreciate our daughters the way I should have." Adaora looked at him, unsure of what to say. "I want to change," Ozo continued. "I want us to focus on raising the children we have, not chasing after something that may never come. Our daughters are blessing, and I'm ready to be a better father to them." Adaora Adaora felt a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in years, she saw genuine remorse in her husband's eyes. Together, they agreed to focus on their family and planned carefully for the future. Ozo promised to be more involved in the children's lives, and Adaora felt hopeful that they could rebuild their relationship. From that day forward, Ozo made good on his promise. He became more engaged in his daughters' lives, helping them with school work, playing with them and appreciating their unique qualities. He no longer pressured Adaora about having more children. They worked together to create peaceful and loving home. The lesson was clear. Family is about love, not tradition. Ozo had finally learned that true legacy is built through the bonds we create, not just the names we pass down. Not long after Ozo and Adaora's reconciliation, Ozo's uncles and elders from the village paid him a visit. They had rumors that Ozo had stopped trying for a son and wanted to discuss the matter with him. Traditionally, the first son was expected to have a male heir to carry on the family name, and they were concerned about the future of Ozo's lineage. The elders arrived one afternoon, and Ozo welcomed them respectfully. Adaora served them kola nuts and drinks, as was customary, and then excused herself, allowing Ozo to speak with the elders in private. Your father always spoke about the importance of having a son, one of the elders began. We hear that you have changed your mind about this. Ozo nodded, his expression calm but resolute. I have. I used to believe that having a son was the only way to secure my legacy. But I have come to understand that my daughters are my legacy too. They are my pride, and I will raise them to be strong, capable women. I no longer wish to pressure my wife into having more children just for the sake of tradition. The elders exchanged glances, clearly surprised by Ozo's words. One of them, an old man with deep wrinkles and a cane, spoke up. Times are changing, it seems, but tradition is important. Without sons, how will your family name continue? Ozo thought for a moment before replying. Tradition is important. Thank you so much for watching this beautiful video. Please do not forget to like, share, and follow us for more interesting videos. Bye.